Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. And while we are waiting, this is Streetscapes for Wellness. And while we're waiting for everyone to join, we hope that you will participate in a poll that we've created. And I'm going to share the link to that poll in the chat. And you can see it on the screen now. We'd just like to know what your two favorite streets in New York City are. Again, I'm going to put that poll. The poll is in the chat. You can find the link to that now. This is really great. Broadway. Okay. Hi, to participate in the poll, there's the link. The link is in the chat. So follow the link that's in the chat and enter your two favorite streets. These could be your favorite streets because they are very vibrant, are very green, are recent shared streets. Maybe they have your favorite stores, favorite restaurants, or just really well designed. Okay, I think we have a almost a critical mass, and it's well time to start. Again, this is Streetscapes for Wellness, and it's a kickoff event for the Public Design Commission's upcoming Designing New York series with a focus on streetscapes. It's a collaboration with the Fine Arts Federation and the American Society of Landscape Architects. And I'm going to now turn this over to the Public Design Commission's Executive Director, Justin Garrett Moore, to say a few words.
Great. Thank you, Carrie, and thank you to all of you who are joining us this afternoon. And a big thank you to the Fine Arts Federation for being great partners and advocates for the Public Design Commission and for great design in our city. In recent years, we've been collaborating with the Fine Arts Federation for our Designing New York series, which is really providing guidance and a resource for our city agencies and the city's design community to help deliver better outcomes for the design of our built environment for our neighborhoods all across New York City, and really with a lens toward equity and environmental considerations in mind in doing that work. And it's great to always, every year as a part of the Fine Arts Federation's annual meeting, to be able to have conversations with our design community and to bring the great leadership that exists here in New York City into helping us solve some of our great challenges and problems. So very excited to have you all here, and I will turn things over to Jeff Biles, who's been one of our great sort of partners in crime in delivering sort of new ways for us to advance design conversations. Our first major initiative was the Designing New York Quality Affordable Housing effort, and Jeff was our sort of our MVP in many ways in helping make that a broad effort. And we've actually just recently updated that work to think about how we address affordable housing design with COVID-19 and health in mind. And so on the Public Design Commission website, you can see the latest version of that work. So these are continuing efforts. But I'll turn it over to Jeff, and thank you for joining us.
Great, thank you, Justin, and thank you, Carrie, and thank you to everyone who is joining with us today. We at the Fine Arts Federation are so thrilled to be part of this conversation about streetscapes for wellness. And before we dive in, I'd like to say a few quick words about the Federation. We're an alliance of arts and design organizations that advocate for a well-designed public realm. And I'd like to acknowledge our member organizations who are a part of our umbrella for their support in today's program and in everything that we do. So thank you to Jennifer Nitsky and the American Society of Landscape Architects New York chapter, which, as Carrie mentioned, is a key partner in the Streetscapes initiative. Thank you to Simeon Bankoff and the Historic Districts Council, Gwen Peer and the National Sculpture Society, Jennifer Sage and the American Institute of Architects New York chapter, Renee Schoenbake and the American Planning Association New York Metro chapter, Michael Royce and the New York Foundation for the Arts, the Sculptors Guild, and the American Institute of Graphic Arts New York chapter. And lastly, a big shout out to our directors, Leanne Shelton, Carol Steinberg, Allison Duncan, Amanda Lehman, Stephen Gottlieb, and Barry Benepe. Everyone has been so supportive of this work. And it's been our collective privilege to collaborate on the Designing New York research and publication series. We began focusing on streetscapes more than 2 years ago now. And of course, at that time, we had no inkling of the critical role that streets and sidewalks would come to play in the public health of cities everywhere. So I know that today's conversation will prove especially valuable as we continue to explore best practices and innovative approaches to streetscape design that promote community wellness and environmental health at this critical time. With that, it's my great pleasure to kick off our first presenter, who is Eric Gregory, the Deputy Director of the Urban Design Office of the New York City Department of City Planning, where he helps shape the future of New York through citywide and neighborhood studies, design research, and creatively engaging with communities. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you to the Fine Arts Federation and also to the PDC for having me here today to share a little bit about the work that we do at City Planning, and most specifically in the Urban Design Office. I'm going to share my screen now, so one moment. Can everyone see that? Okay, thank you. So we at City Planning, sorry, it's trying to advance. Urban design participates in improving New Yorkers' quality of life and well-being. And And at city planning, we as urban designers operate from the first standpoint of people and how they perceive their city. We focus on this lens because this is how we all interact with our public realm, how we walk down streets, how we interact with buildings, our parks, our waterfronts, and how one navigates the environment is important to us, and how they perceive it is key to that. We, about 4 or 5 years ago, we created urban design principles for our agency. These really were a way for us to really put, as we were putting people first, think about how wellness plays out in our built environment. And this is kind of centered to what we do and how we're thinking about making our spaces feel more welcoming, opening, and providing a sense of belonging. These were these are evergreen principles meant to kind of always guide our work, but we also recognize that it's important for us to refresh them every now and again. So we're currently in process of doing so, kind of taking in everything that we've all experienced over the course of 2020, which has been a challenging year, and also to reflect inequities that have long been standing here in our city, in our built environment for decades. Sorry. So, when we think about the public realm, it's always important just to zoom out and think about all the things that encompass that. And certainly, as Jeff mentioned, streets and sidewalks are a big part of that. And our open spaces, our parks, our waterfront. But plazas also play a big role, and our buildings also play a big role. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, about how the interaction of buildings is important with the streets. And also just kind of understanding how much of these, each of these kind of buckets takes up in our space, and knowing that buildings, streets, and parks make up the vast majority of our city. So certainly here at City Planning, where we shape a lot of the buildings of our city, it's not lost on us that the importance that we contribute to shaping our built environment. It's also important, we've been doing a lot of work to look across a lot of different agencies and the different codes and regulations and rules of thumb that guide our work, and understanding that dimensions of our city also play a key role, and knowing that our streetscapes are very varied throughout the city, from our very dense central business districts to our lower scale density neighborhoods. And all of these have key drivers dimensionally that really promote wellness and physical activity and movement through the city. So this is something that we're currently working on to kind of compile these things, and we hope to share as a resource for all New Yorkers to kind of better understand the dimensions at play, and how they can help influence them in the future. You'll hear from in a little bit from Delma at NYCHA and Josh from Department of Health on some work that we've collaborated with them over the years. And this is something that's really key for us as a city agency to be working with many other designers and planners across the spectrum. We worked most recently with NYCHA on Connected Communities Guidebook, which I'm sure Delma will dive a little bit more into, which really looked at how urban design of the 400,000 residents who call NYCHA home here in our city interact with their environment, and how can we better connect communities together with their neighborhoods, and looking at the open spaces around the campuses as a key driver of that. And of course, over the years, we've looked at active design guidelines, and our agency was key in one subset of that work in the study of shaping the sidewalk experience, which really looked at how sidewalks, the role that they play, as Jeff had mentioned at the beginning. Sorry, going backwards. And of course, learning with and from communities is extremely important for us. We as designers, of course, have a lot of ideas, but it's really when those ideas are brought from a multitude of voices within the communities in which we work that really make projects work and make the design of them successful. So these are just some snapshots of the importance of working with communities along the way. And this is some snapshots from engagement exercises and the Southern Boulevard study that we had over the past few years. And also just as designers, our ability to visually communicate and what tools are we creating to have these conversations. So how are we capturing how folks move in and around their neighborhoods and what routes are important to them? And how are we kind of drawing out their feedback in a way that captures it for them and helps us to take that back and really fold that into our work as we're working for all New Yorkers. Sorry again. And so again, this advocating for New Yorkers is also very key, and we try to find ways of interacting with the public outside of these the general studies that we do, and really getting on the ground and understanding how we can change public spaces with, for instance, here and also in Southern Boulevard on Parking Day, we organized along with a few other local partners to take over spaces in the street and thinking about ways that we could bring the conversation around the built environment of this stretch of the Bronx, and thinking about activities that could take place in that space. And of course, on the far right, you'll notice that this is now a current snapshot that a restaurant has taken advantage of the Open Restaurants program. So we're starting to really unpack that our streets are much more, and they can contribute a lot more. And I think that's one of the silver linings of what we've all had to endure over the past year. And it really sets a charge for us going forward. And how do we build on the success of these programs and what they've shown we can do with the streets that isn't just for cars, but really a multitude of activities. So from not just restaurants, of course, and the play streets. This is one actually not too far from where I live on 120th Street, which has really been an amazing street to watch at various times of day into the evening. And it's amazing what you can do when you have strong partners on the ground and an idea of programming. So it's not just the built environment and how we're shaping it, which is a lot of what I shared, but it really does come down to people and the programming of those spaces that are key. And we've learned a lot, and I'm sure all of you in moving through the city have seen some good things with these initiatives, and certainly some things that we want to improve upon. So I think that's where we as designers have a lot of work ahead of us to think about this and ensure that some of these activities aren't just happening in the more affluent areas of the city, but they're happening in the neighborhoods that need them most, that lack spaces for wellness. So with that, I will conclude and just again say thank you. And if you'd like to learn more about urban design at City Planning, please visit us at nyc.gov/urban design. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for that really helpful overview from the planning perspective. Moving on, our next presenter is Joshua Langham, who is the Assistant Director of the Active Design Program at the NYC Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, where he focuses on increasing opportunities for physical activity and overall health through the design of the built environment. Welcome, Josh.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm going to share my screen as well. So hello, everybody again. I'm Josh Langham. I'm the Assistant Director of the Active Design Program at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Today, I'm going to talk about the Active Design Guidelines, if I can make this work. There we go. The Active Design Guidelines and some of the work that we're doing to update the Active Design Guidelines at our department, as well as in collaboration with our other city agency partners. As you can imagine, and this has been reiterated, public realm and public space has become an ever more important, especially during times of COVID. And so this is a really opportune time for us to explore what active design means and expand the definition a little bit. So just a little bit of background. I hope most of you have heard of active design. It's been around for about 10 years now, as you can see. And it was really a pioneering publication in terms of connecting the built environment with public health outcomes. The development of the ADGs was of course in collaboration with architects, designers, public health folks, and city agency partners. And what made it unique was that it was really grounded in evidence. So research from public health research from the architect and design field. Also, it's backed by an executive order. So this was signed at the end of the Bloomberg administration that really said that our infrastructure agencies needed to consider active design guidelines when they're developing new projects. And this also contains sort of training and ensuring that our architects and designers who are building in the city really understand what active design means and are trying to promote health through the design of the built environment. And since 2010, this really has had a global reach and influence. It's been downloaded in almost every single country across the world and really has spurred a lot of other innovations from other cities. The city of Miami has their own active design guidelines, and also the city of Sacramento has included it in their zoning plan there. This has also led to different changes in city policy and building codes, zoning for bicycle parking, the Vision Zero initiative, all sort of relate back to strategies that are contained within the ADGs. So now I sort of want to talk about, the vision for ADG 2.0 and sort of why we're looking at this now. It's really about, promoting whole person health. Again, it's been about 10 years, and since then there's been a lot of new research and around the built environment, its impacts on health, and we really feel that we needed to expand the definition of the ADGs. The original ones were really focused on the promotion of physical activity, really based on around the obesity epidemic that was, sort of front and center back in the mid 2000s and 2010s. Of course, obesity is still a major public health concern in our country and in our city, but what we've learned more and more that the built environment really has impacts on other aspects of health, including mental health and social cohesion. So, as we started to exploring an update to the ADGs, we really wanted to put together a vision that really promoted holistic health, whole person health. And as at DOH and along with our other city agency partners, equity and racial justice has been front and center of this administration and certainly at the health department. So we really wanted to apply a racial justice and equity lens to these guidelines, which is certainly new from what was produced in 2010. So again, equity is sort of our top priority. We still want to promote physical activity through the design of the built environment, but really look at mental health, social cohesion, aspects of public safety, as well as, civic trust. As you heard, the work that city planning is doing, the work that NYCHA is doing, the work that our close partners at DDC are doing, we really want to ensure that the guidelines are aligned with everything, and really we're not reinventing the wheel, but just continuing to support what our agency partners are doing and also apply, the health evidence behind it. So evidence-informed design strategies. This is what we know can improve health outcomes. So as you see here, there's a lot of work that our city agency partners have been doing, and collaboration is key for us at DOH as we lead the process of updating the ADGs. And again, we just want to make sure that we're aligned and supportive of our agency partners. And again, it's backed by an executive order, so we really feel that the ADGs can be used as an advocacy tool to advance some of the work that's happening at our agency partners. Again, the research has really pointed to these interconnected health outcomes. And we really feel that by looking at all three of these sort of buckets of health outcomes that we can really put together guidelines that support all aspects of health. So, when we think about mental health, when we think about social health and physical health, they're all really connected. So, when people don't feel safe going outside, they're likely not going to exercise either. If they don't have safe places to interact with other people in the neighborhood, they're not going to feel socially connected. So we really, really want to focus on the interconnected health outcomes here. So this is, how our scans of literature, we've reviewed thousands of articles at this point, really have narrowed down to about 400 that we've sort of vetted and reviewed. And this is sort of how we've categorized them. Enhancing connections to nature. I think this is probably one of the biggest buckets of research that has happened over the past 10 years. Really, even seeing a tree outside can affect your mental well-being, your sense of calm when you're walking down the street. I think if we looked at the Mentimeter and you looked at the streets that people put in there, they probably have trees. They probably have street trees. These provide areas of refuge. Really prioritizing user comfort. This really comes down to understanding who you're designing for. What are the unique needs of the community, or the building occupants, or people who live in that neighborhood. Providing light and shade, daylighting in certain areas. Preserving and celebrating community identity. One thing that we understand is that community engagement and collaboration is key to understanding how to have people feel connected to the neighborhood, have a sense of ownership of where they live. And that should be reflected in the design of their streetscapes, of their public spaces, and even the buildings and the homes that they live in. And creating high quality gathering places. So, using nice materials, using things that people feel that have some value and that we really cared about how we're designing their space. It really does have an impact on how people feel. And of course, enhanced perceptions of safety. So, again, if you don't feel safe walking in your neighborhood, you're not going to be physically active. You're going to have stress. You're going to have anxiety. This is street lighting. This is daylighting in buildings. And this is just, maintenance and operations, maintenance and facilities. So if there's trash on your street, you're not going to feel safe. There's sort of that disorder element there. So we're about 2 years into this process. We really wanted to take our time. We would like to move faster, of course, but the pandemic has slowed things a little bit. But, we really wanted to make sure that we're reaching the right folks, that we're interacting and engaging with our agency partners in a meaningful way. We've engaged over 125 individuals at this point, about 20 city agencies. We've had 10 to 12 different workshops, 12 in-depth interviews with our community stakeholders to understand what are priorities in their neighborhoods. And this is sort of where we've landed on these just 4 bullets. This is just brushing the tip of the iceberg of what we've heard, but really creating welcoming, inclusive spaces, making equity a top priority, really understanding who has access to what and ensuring that we're doing something about it. And again, enhancing community engagement efforts. And then of course, evaluating and measuring project impact. So, as part of this process, we're really hoping to develop an evaluation approach that we can understand what's happening in our neighborhoods. So we hope to have a publication ready by, the end of the summer, fall 2021, if things sort of slow down at the health department for us, but we're continuing to move forward. We're in the content development stage. So we really look forward to continuing to engage with experts in the design community and our agency partners. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Josh. It's so exciting to see the active design guidelines evolve in this way to take a much broader view of public health and community health. So we look forward to that continuing work. Carrie, I think now we're going to pause and have another poll for our audience.
Yes. So our second poll is up, and you can find the link to that poll in the chat right now. So look in the chat and follow that link, and please let us know where you feel the safest as a pedestrian or bicyclist in the city. Perhaps it's your favorite bike route, your favorite protected bike path, or a greenway, or a plaza. Again, you can find the link to the poll in the chat. And I just want to give a shout out to the Department of Transportation and Parks and Recreation, because they really have been working hard to create these spaces that are being highlighted, that I can see here in this poll. Great. Jeff, do you want to continue? I think we're pretty good on the poll.
Yeah, no,
Thank you everyone for participating.
Absolutely. This is a really interesting and kind of incredible mosaic of safe spaces for us to consider as we think about the best ways to design our streets and streetscapes. So thank you. All right, our next panelist is Deborah Martin, the Executive Director of Van Allen Institute and the newest member of the Public Design Commission. Since joining Van Allen last year, Deborah has built on her significant achievements leading the New York Restoration Project and the Design Trust for Public Space, focusing on initiatives that put community interests at the heart of the public realm. Welcome, Deborah.
That's so tiresome. When are we going to be done with that muting problem? Thank you, Jeff. I want to start by just saying thank you to PDC as the newest, one of the newest members. I already feel very well cared for by Carrie and Justin and the rest of the team. Thank you, Fine Arts Federation. And also what I'm going to speak about today is a program that was a collaboration between the Urban Design Forum and Van Allen Institute. And many here in this audience today, I'm quite certain, were participants in that program, Neighborhoods Now. So I do want to say thank you to the Van Allen board for their support of the program, to many of the designers who participated, to our city agency partners. I know a number of you are in the audience today, for your efforts to make our city's streets open to rapid change in the context of the pandemic. So I think most of you here know Van Allen and the Urban Design Forum. The Urban Design Forum for 40 years has mobilized diverse and interdisciplinary experts around the critical issues in New York City's built environment. And Van Allen, founded more than 125 years ago, works to create equitable cities through inclusive design. I'm going to share my screen now, and I will tell you about our collaborative program, Neighborhoods Now. Okay, there we go. So I want to start, because this is about streetscapes for wellness, I want to start by echoing my colleagues, Josh and Eric. I feel like ADG 2.0's holistic approach was very much echoed in the forum and Van Allen's goals for Neighborhoods Now, because we understand that all solutions have implications for community wellness. So there's the solutions that touch on, like, how can you be safe in terms of physical distance, in terms of your upgrading of your HVAC system, your office protocols, et cetera. But then there's the social and the mental, the emotional implications of a program like Neighborhoods Now, in terms of, at the first instance, putting community at the center and community feeling that even in under-resourced communities, and particularly in under-resourced communities, that the larger city was reaching out and extending support. And then that feeling of safety that extended at the neighborhood scale as a result of the program in the design of socially distant spaces, but also ways to gather in a socially distant way. So the social implications of that and the efforts to increase opportunities for cohesion, even in the context of the pandemic. Okay, let's see if I can advance here. There we go. Okay, so I hardly need to state that, you know, the pandemic devastated communities of color in New York City and drove an economic crisis in those same neighborhoods. And we know that these are the neighborhoods where our essential workers live. And so there was a kind of crisis that was rooted in the past and then exacerbated at the beginning of the pandemic. So as the city's more well-resourced communities and businesses began to purchase the design support they'd need to reopen safely, the Urban Design Forum and Van Allen began talking about what we could do to help these communities. So our first effort was we collaborated with the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, ANHD. Barika Williams, if you're in the room, thank you, thank you, thank you. ANHD reached out to its members, and we partnered with 5 community-based organizations in Bed-Stuy, Jackson Heights, Kingsbridge, and Washington Heights. These are neighborhoods that were struggling economically before the pandemic, but as I think you can see in these images, they're thriving, they're diverse, they're why we live in New York. They're the kind of community that we all should be thinking about, and we all are thinking and talking about today. We want to preserve and support these communities. And that was the intention of this program. Sorry about that. Huh. There we go. Okay. So this is just another way of articulating what we saw in the map. Our partners were a mix of CDCs, BIDs, and membership organizations serving predominantly Black, Latinx, and Asian communities with low median income and very high COVID rates. In about 6 weeks' time, we mobilized. Okay. Yes? Okay. In about 6 weeks' time, we mobilized about 65 firms, more than 25 experts. By year end, we think the pro bono expertise contributed will be somewhere around 2 million, and 7 New York City agencies participated actively in this effort. We haven't had the resources to evaluate the impact in terms of businesses that were supported by Neighborhoods Now, but it's just one example. We know that there were 24 restaurants in Jackson Heights that were able to remain open in part as a result of their support from the Neighborhoods Now program. These are, this is a snapshot of the firms that supported this effort. And you'll see that while there's many architecture planning, landscape architecture firms, there are also law firms, graphic designers, CDFIs, financial groups, because we understood, as Josh said earlier, that public health and public well-being it must be a holistic, requires a holistic approach. We know that many of our participants told us that this was a deeply meaningful project for them, working with our community partners. And it's our hope, it was our hope from the beginning, that these relationships would persist beyond the active phase of the program. The program's active phase for its first cohort of communities is now sunsetting, and we're about to launch a second cohort. And across every community, some of these collaborations continue. So this is just a snapshot of the Neighborhoods Now org chart. And I show this to this audience just to illustrate the kind of incredible breadth of generosity. I mean, this project started from the basic idea that New Yorkers want to help one another. We knew that. And really, there was just a need for a kind of device of how we bring people together quickly. And because of the pandemic and because of Zoom, that certain barriers fell and we were able to do that. So at the top are our community partners who defined the scope of the work and told us what it is that they needed help with. The firms that you saw in the logos in the page before is the next layer of support. And then they were able to draw on supporting expertise and expertise from our city agency partners throughout the process, sometimes all together at once in various conversations, let's say about a certain typology. Can you put retail and restaurants out into a park or public right of way? And both DOT and Parks met on an individual basis with each neighborhood. So thank you, DOT and Parks, for that. And then Van Allen and the Urban Design Forum at the bottom, our effort was to make sure that all of this communication happens smoothly. So there were short and long-term solutions that came out of this. I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures of what that looks like in the implementation. Much of the short-term solution is either being implemented or we hope will be within the next few months and ready for spring and summer, but also in winter. And then longer-term policy shifts that we'll likely be talking about in the panel around how and what change can happen in the public realm long-term based on what was our gigantic citywide experiment triggered by the pandemic. So what you're going to see here are a few images of things that came out of this program that were almost a conditioned precedent that we needed to have these resources before, even though they're not traditional design solutions like a detail of how you build a restaurant barrier. We needed these other kind of holistic resources in order to enable the physical resources to be able to be built, like signs. So we had 3 graphic design partners, 212, Partner and Partners, and Pentagram. They designed more than 50 signs. You can find them on neighborhoodsnow.nyc, and they're downloadable in Arabic, Bengali, English, and Spanish. This is a pamphlet that was created that is using a graphic novel format, because like who doesn't love that, to explain it in a kind of easily and engaging and easy to take in way about how to reopen safely in an office context and other contexts that people were working in. And then there were the kind of the legal dimensions, right? Because we all know that, if you don't understand the regs, for example, this, let's go back. Oh my God, okay. Going backwards is harder than going forwards, apparently. I really look forward to the day when these kind of embarrassing Zoom things are not shared with 110 people. There we go. Okay, let's not go back. Let's just stay right here. This is a license template for anyone to use. Anyone can download it if you want to now do a quick pop-up in in a vacant space. There were many workshops around financial literacy, around landlord-tenant mediation, around all of the kind of like regulatory and rapidly changing regs that people needed to understand, like, can I build a barrier in the public realm or am I going to get fined? People needed to know the answer to that question before they built anything. And then, of course, there were tons of design recommendations, details, construction drawings that either are being implemented or will be ultimately. This was something a design created for the Bed-Stuy bid by the team led by Moody Nolan. This is a design created for our partner in Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition. by Cook Fox. It's a kit of parts for operating safely in their backyard. This is for by the team led by Arab for Washington Heights. It's for the Word Up Community Bookshop, which those of you who know Washington Heights, Word Up is like where you got to go to learn anything. And this is the digital toolkit. It's a microsite that the Urban Design Forum in Van Allen created. So you can find the recommendations organized by community, but on this microsite, anyone can search them by the categories that you see at left. So on the right, if you search restaurant, you're going to find a way to build barricades inexpensively. And I recommend that anyone who's still looking for reopening resources, by all means, link to this microsite. And then here's some implementation. On the left was a community build. On the right is a plant and paint day in Jackson Heights. On the left, and then on the left we have, and on the right, restaurant extensions so that restaurants could go into the public realm. Yeah, that was the right, was the plant and paint day. That's a local artist who did that mural. This is how the signage and the pamphlets were deployed in different communities. Here, that dance picture by Cameron Blaylock has kind of gone viral now. This was a restaurant reopening in Kingsbridge, and they basically took a boombox and pointed it into the street, and people just started dancing. It was extraordinary. That's Bed-Stuy Restoration Plaza, planting day on the top right, and on the bottom right, a mural that Tats Crew did in the Bronx in connection with the Neighborhoods Now effort. So I want to note that from the beginning, 50% of every dollar raised went towards implementation. It was a direct pass through from Van Allen and the Urban Design Forum to our community partners, and that structure continues. That was a first for both of our organizations, and has been really helpful in some of this implementation. Finally, longer term, there have been some really interesting policy recommendations. This is a land swap idea that the team led by KPF came up with for the Bed-Stuy Restoration and Bed-Stuy Gateway bid. And it has to do with using vacant land and vacant interior spaces to expand and to allow for social distancing. This is an idea that could carry past the pandemic. And finally, as we go into our second cohort, the Van Allen and Urban Design Forum team are turning our attention to cultural organizations. We know that the large culturals have already put their own plans, post-pandemic plans in place, but small or cultural organizations like the 40+ organizations that belong to Fourth Arts Block haven't had the same resources. So they're one of our community partners in the second cohort. And with that, I will stop sharing. Thank you, everyone, for hearing about Neighborhoods Now.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I know there's so much to say about this incredible initiative, and we'll have some time during the conversation portion to delve a little deeper into some aspects of it. So I'm going to hold that thought for now, and we will move on to our next presenter, who is Delma Palma. She is a licensed architect and urban designer at the New York City Housing Authority. Delma leads the Connected Communities Initiative to better connect public housing residents to surrounding neighborhoods through design. Welcome, Delma.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And as I share my screen, I really want to commend the PDC and the whole team who set this up, because I feel like it has been really nicely set up so that everybody kind of gives background and goes further in depth as we go through the panel. So in terms of understanding the city's urban design initiatives and priorities through what Eric was talking about and Josh talking about expanding the definition of health and being way more inclusive than we have been prior. And then talking about how to implement in these sort of commercial corridors. So I'm going to dive in a little bit into how we look at these ideas in a residential perspective, and particularly in a public housing perspective with New York City's Housing Authority. So just a little bit of background on the Housing Authority. which is where I work. So I forgot to introduce myself, Delma from the Housing Authority. I work in the design department at the Housing Authority, leading the Connected Communities Initiative, which was referenced earlier. And so the Housing Authority is the largest landlord and housing authority in North America. So just to give you a sense of scale, we house about 500,000 people in New York City. So this is across 2,400 acres in all 5 boroughs. So we see this landscape in pretty much every district throughout New York City. And we know that that landscape looks a lot different than the typical New York City block. Here's an image of one of our larger developments, Queensbridge Houses, an aerial view. So you're able to see what the streetscape or public space, public realm there looks like. And so it is circled in red on the plan site. And we're able to see that not only does it have actual true public streets, but it also has these private pedestrian ways that we can talk about as New York City's private streetscape. And so the Connected Communities Initiative is really focused on urban design that activates and improves these connections between the NYCHA community and the surrounding neighborhoods. And we look at doing this through 3 ways: empowering residents through participatory design, expanding the audience of partnership for the authority to work with many, many different organizations, and then promoting community-centered design, not only through projects, but through the programs and policies that we implement in the future as well. So Josh talked a lot about, how we understand health and place, and I always really appreciate that because he's read all of the articles, so you can really believe what he says. But then I want to focus it on things that are very significant to the public housing community too, which he mentioned, which are safety and resilience and social cohesion. And so these are a couple of quotes that I think exemplify that nicely, which is, when we design urban spaces with the aim of promoting public safety and security, citizens become less fearful of crime and more focused on community development. And as a result, those cities can become more livable, cosmopolitan centers with vibrant economies and engaged citizens. And so this sort of shows you that it's not just about aesthetic quality or the design of the public space, but everything that contributes to. And the second one is about really planning for the future, promoting social integration in a sustainable and equitable way, and how those types of patterns can help us as policymakers and governments to make policy choices that are oriented to improving social cohesion. And taking it into the perspective of the current health situation we're in, NYCHA's residents are low-income New Yorkers, are our most vulnerable New Yorkers. 90% are Black and Latinx, and we have a significant senior and children population. And as Deborah mentioned, a lot of our essential workers live in not only NYCHA, but in these neighborhoods that were hardest hit. Some of the biggest employers for NYCHA residents are the Department of Education, the NYPD, and the MTA, and NYCHA itself. So we really have to understand this as critical urban infrastructure for the recovery of these communities coming out of COVID, hopefully in the next few months. So the Connected Communities Initiative really focuses on people. We also heard this mentioned before, but it is extremely important. The participatory design process, talking to the people and the users who have the lived experience and the expertise in the places that we want to design in. But also engaging in partnerships, because designers don't always have the fullest expertise of the topic at hand, whether that is resilience or safety or transit. And so we try to partner with many organizations to bring that expertise to our residents and increase access to those types of things. And then obviously investing in place and really being able to transform places in different ways. These are ones that I highlight to sort of show the breadth of ways that you can do that. This project on the upper left hand is focused on green infrastructure and resilience and climate adaptation, whereas the one where you see the guy doing the pull-ups is focused on physical health and programming to help residents have access to some outdoor athletic equipment. And then the pictures that you see on the bottom are really focused on neighborhood activation and safety, and that's with the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice and the Center for Court Innovation. And I can talk a little bit about those later on in the Q&A. And then I wanted to wrap up by highlighting the guidebook that Eric and Josh mentioned, because it was a significant policy document for the Housing Authority, because it allowed us to not only put out, urban design guidelines, but really explain and give context to why the Housing Authority looks the way it does, how it functions today, and the history, right? The 80 years that precede us today. So that's what the first chapter is about. The second one focuses on community engagement, actual strategies, principles, things we've heard directly from our residents that are important to them when designing communities, urban design guidelines, and then also new construction and preservation guidelines as we undertake our real estate initiatives moving forward. I wanted to briefly highlight some of the actual strategies in there, because I think it gets into the nitty-gritty that we saw in a lot of Deborah's pictures, but lighting, wayfinding, materiality, all of these things that make up the design of the public realm. We tried to give real examples in the book, things that are applicable to some of the unique typologies that NYCHA has in its portfolio. And I would highly recommend that you explore the book if you can on your own time. I think Carrie's going to put a link in the chat. And with that, I will stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Delma. It's so inspiring to see the work that you and NYCHA are doing on the public realm. I think it really can serve as a template for our thinking about streetscapes and the design of the city at large. So it's really terrific to see all that's going on there. It's now my pleasure to welcome our final panelist, Karen Phillips, who served for many years as a New York City Planning Commissioner and has been a distinguished advocate for residents in underserved and economically distressed communities, most notably Harlem, where Karen helped lead the neighborhood's transformation as CEO of the Abyssinian Development Corporation. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? I don't have a presentation to share, and being the last speaker, I'd really like to just really tee up a number of things for us to take with us into the question and answer and the chat room, particularly from my advantage point, and one that should be very clear is that I am probably one of the older people involved in this panel, but I think my perspective now, I am recently retired, which means that even though everybody, I'm working at home, but also being able to take a different vantage point at the neighborhood that I live in, which is still Harlem, but also to have us all to focus on the things that we've heard. And I must say, it's very impressive to know about Neighborhood Now and the things that the Housing Authority is doing, and also DCP and of course, Department of Health, in terms of looking at very closely the importance of community engagement. And of course, with my experience and even with serving on the City Planning Commission, my focus was to have people to know that it's not always what we do as designers and planners in urban design, but it's how we do it. And the community engagement is a key piece. But as we talk about wellness, particularly in thinking about how COVID has impacted us, and not only the COVID in terms of the health crisis, but we also have to look at the crisis of the unveiling of the racism and underlying issues that are faced by many of the people that we're talking about in our communities, and the interaction with them and other citizens across the city, and how that impacts our streetscapes and the general wellness of our city. We are now going to be facing some very critical times to get the city back on its feet. We can see that the streetscapes and outside has become increasingly more important place. And the things that we've seen in terms of people being on the street. But again, one of the things that the pandemic has taught us is that we say we're all in this together. because how one lives and interacts in public impacts other people. And be that mask wearing and washing your hands impacts that we are interconnected in this, in our streetscapes, but also in we need to realize that there's a certain segment of our population where being outside is a almost a necessity, because when we think of a lot of us working at home or even having to stay inside, we have a place to do that. But for a lot of the population around the city, that's not an option to move from one room or to be able to sit inside. So being outside, being in the open is their only outlet from places that are where there's doubled up several families living together. And then we see the outcome of that with people who don't always work at home, but opt to go out and provide essential services for the rest of us, is that those are places where the higher incidents of COVID have happened. As we look as well as what's happened in the city and how that impacts us, being able to realize that the unveiling of some of the inequities has bubbled over into our streets. And I don't know how much we are actually talking about that, even from protests to the way that the law enforcement handles people who are in protest. And again, people were impacted and realized that it's once everybody is mixed together and in that kind of environment, the streetscape and where you go and how you can maneuver in that becomes critical. So these are issues that I think should be examined or as we look at things. But I think having the community-based organizations be the leaders in terms of the transformation and implementation of some of the things is very important. So Jeff, I don't know if there's, we can start off the Q&A, but I would like to engage people to look at how New York City is going to recover and all the wonderful things that we've done in our streetscapes are going to impact day-to-day living. We are now giving up more and more of what was public space to private enterprises, whether it's bike share or the new outdoor restaurants, which are wonderful, but they're taking away sidewalk spaces, particularly people like me who are seniors and want to walk in a safe place. But we do have to reevaluate that, and the evaluation of how those things work out long-term in terms of maintenance of those, any guidelines in terms of what's going to happen with the outdoor restaurants when the winter months, and a lot of those issues that need to be a part of our discussion here. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And absolutely, I want to follow up with some questions in a moment to start our Q&A portion of this segment. Before we launch into that, I want to introduce our visual capture artist, Zara Fina-Stasi. Zara is the founder of the New York City-based creative studio Good for the Bees, through which she uses art to help people thrive. Her work encompasses visual capture, painting, illustration, and murals, including a recently completed mural across 3,000 square feet of bike lane barrier for the NYC Department of Transportation's art program in Brooklyn. Zara will be live drawing and has been, as you see, during the remainder of the program to help capture themes and insights from our conversation. So thank you and welcome, Zara. Okay, so this does start the Q&A. We have some questions prepared for our panelists, and we'll reserve some time for questions from the audience as well. So please feel free to type any questions you may have into the chat window, and we'll direct those to the panelists as time permits. Going back to Karen, one thing you alluded to as have other panelists, is this question of equity in our public spaces, which has really become an overarching goal of public design across New York City. And I'm wondering if you can address or maybe continue your remarks about how what would more equitable streetscapes look like as we think about reimagining our public spaces.
Well, I think one of the first things, and we all are now realizing that is not a question for all of us as designers to answer. It's asking the people who use it is a very important part of that. But to realize that a lot of what we do and have done are things that often make people feel like it's no longer their space. I mean, whether it's, and then looking at some of those things like our link cubicles on the street, is that a way that we can use technology to engage more people in what's going on? Of course, as I always say, that community-based organizations or down to like block associations to say, this is what's planned, or what do you think the neighborhood needs, or to make sure that we're balancing what the public, what's public and what can be commercialized in what way, and then how does that commercialization benefit the actual neighborhood? And does that mean that in maintaining it, you're getting people from the neighborhood or the restaurants, or engaging with the citizens around it, or just having restaurants where people who live in the neighborhood realize that they can't go and sit down and have a $60 meal in an area that's now enclosed, and the kind of I don't want to say resentment, or just kind of inequality that's like in your face. So I think those are things that we as urban designers need to think about, and also things that, as I say, and as being a part of a group, Black Landscape Architects Network, is that when you have people from those communities at the table, at least there's an input initially that can be sensitive to some of the needs there. But again, those are things that we, as a bigger society, have to work on. We look to people to say, well, what is it that you need and want? But having people from that community being trained and a part of, maybe starting with things like some of the NYCHA projects in terms of gardening and greening, or being ambassadors for the neighborhood or for our streetscapes, means that it's people are involved. It's not just someone else that's going to come in and do that for them, but that it generates jobs and a sense of belonging and self for them. So I'm sure there are other people who are much more versed in that, but it's also for us to look around to say, why can't we get more people who are architects and landscape architectures or urban designers who bring with them that that sense of what it's like, or visiting. I've been in a public housing building before. I've been in somebody's apartment, but those kind of key issues.
Mm-hmm. Those are really such important points. I thought perhaps we could turn to Delma, who spoke a little bit about ways that the connected communities, as you mentioned, Karen, works with local community-based organizations, artists, as a way to both engage NYCHA residents and also, lead toward innovative public realm outcomes. Delma, what lessons do you think we can learn from this model as we think about partnering with these types of groups in the realm of streetscape design?
Sure. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about a couple of partnerships. One in particular that I mentioned, which was about neighborhood activation and safety, because the first piece of it is to understand what the need is in the community, right? Like, not go with the assumption that there's something else that is necessary there and try to solve that problem. So if we have a better understanding of the need, which the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice and the Center for Court Innovation really did a great job mapping that need, walking with residents through the neighborhood, seeing what was impacting them and what they saw as potential improvements. So whether that was youth programming and spaces that were for teens, or whether they were for seniors, or it was very creative lighting and artwork, there were a variety of ways that those needs could be met. So once you have that understanding and you're working with organizations that are there, in earnest and oftentimes for a good amount of time. So we've been working with MOCJ and CCI for over 3-4 years now. And so they've built that trust with the residents. They understand what the needs are, and then they are working with designers, like many of the ones on the call, to find innovative solutions to the needs, whether those are design solutions, programming solutions, partnerships that we can connect on in solving problems in different ways. And I think one of the key pieces of partnering with arts organizations or nonprofit and community-based organizations is that they are much more nimble than large government structures are. So that gives them flexibility to, if something happens, be able to understand what the new need is and react. So in the example that I'm giving with MOCJ and CCI, they were doing participatory design for sort of placekeeping projects for a very long time. And then when COVID hit, they pivoted to emergency response and delivering food and PPE. And so that's really fantastic, right? Because you have this network that was already set up to respond to a new and more urgent need. So I think the partnership is incredibly necessary because we have the structures of government who are creating the policies and a lot of times providing funding, but the community organizations really have a pulse on what's happening on the ground and can implement in a flexible and targeted approach.
Fantastic. Those are some really great examples of how this can work in practice. Deborah, I wanted to take this thread to the Neighborhoods Now initiative, which in a lot of ways was explicitly about building bridges or forging alliances across demographic boundaries, across professional boundaries. What were some of the lessons that you learned about really building these bridges and working with many different players to make this happen?
New York is a big city, right? And the agencies have their leadership over different realms, but we know that best practices and the best thinking are kind of what Josh talked about when he talked about active design guidelines too. It's holistic, and that works. And Delma touched on this too. That happens at the city scale also, in the sense that everyone needs to come together. When you're reacting to a crisis, and everyone needs to come together in good times too. So what happened with the pandemic is that barriers that would be there between how things are permitted, how meetings happen, how people organize getting together to answer questions and meet needs, those barriers lowered. And so there's a gap in a way between, it's not that the city doesn't want to meet needs. It's just, it's very hard when you're talking about under-resourced communities where there's a digital divide, where there's people who maybe don't even have a computer, don't speak English, don't have reliable Wi-Fi. Like, there are kind of like vectors of ways that resources come in that aren't always accessible. So, I mean, I think Karen is really right that in a way, land is power, and a sense of agency is over the land in your own neighborhood. I mean, that's what redlining was all about, right? And a sense of agency over what happens in your own community can only come if you have those tools to understand like what's possible, and then the resources to implement. So I think, for me, a big learning from Neighborhoods Now and from the opportunities that became available as a result of the pandemic are that we really need to work as a city to make sure that every community has almost like a kind of design integrator or coordinator or community-based person. And that could be a community-based organization that's already there, who can be the kind of conduit and connector and speak with authenticity to what the folks who live in that community want and need on their own terms, and then pull in the resources that sometimes get lost in the gap of language, of digital access, of regulatory confusion and opacity. So I think that's a real learning for us at the forum and at Van Allen. And I think there's a lot that the city can do to try to, I mean, keeping in mind what Karen said about, like, we really do need to understand like the implications for folks walking down the street when there's like stuff going on all over the place and whatever, and whether that's safe or not. We need to understand that. And I want to just note that. But we also need to feel a kind of a sense of possibility and opportunity, because we did all this stuff so quickly. And you know, let's try to keep what's good about it, because we have to shift our values. For too long as a city, we've given over too much to this idea that everything's about the car, and that has to end. We know that. We've known that for a long time, but we couldn't model it. And the pandemic gave us the opportunity to model it. Like, we see it right now. Every neighborhood, you can see it. So that to me is, it's the modeling and the systems that need to come in that I really see as an outcome of the connection between our program and this moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say, Jeff, that I think ANHD was a perfect place to start those kind of conversations, because who they work with are people who are really on the ground in a lot of different areas. But when you say that you provide them the resources with which they go to the neighborhood and people who are right there to help them navigate, it's such an important. And of course, there are a few, you know, there are business improvement districts and other kind of organizations that focus more on the commercial areas and would be more, I guess, in cooperation with the city on a number of things, but not every neighborhood has those. And of course, strengthening those. And we know what those do for our major plazas and open spaces, but look at creating the opportunity where there none exists to have these community-based organizations who know the people in the neighborhood, who can get to know even better people who come and open businesses, and to help them navigate between the new customers that they're trying to bring in and the people who have to live in the neighborhood. That it's great that you just built this huge outdoor restaurant, you know, and space that people walk by who can't eat there, but do you contribute now to music, you know, a block or so up in a park, and let them know that what you're doing, your ability to stay and operate in the neighborhood also helps the people who are living there, who have to, you know, now accommodate extra noise or the extra people, even though they can't benefit from the profits that you're making from your restaurant.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Karen and Deborah, for those really important perspectives. I wondered if Josh, if you might share some of your thoughts, seeing as how the holistic approach of the active design guidelines really lends itself to this kind of collaboration among different sectors or agencies or communities. Can you share some thoughts on the path forward?
Yeah, I mean, I would just, you know, certainly echo everything that, you know, folks have been saying, Deborah, Delma, and Karen, about the importance of really relying on our community-based organizations to lead efforts and to identify what the needs are in their particular neighborhoods and spots. I mean, you know, as an example, I think the Neighborhoods Now initiative is something that we can point to as an example of something that was organized and pulled together really quickly, but, you know, sort of echoes what we're trying to do with the active design guidelines, where it was a community-led process, there was engagement efforts, they understood what the needs were there. And then, you know, building healthy communities, which is a program that's been around for 5 or 6 years. And I know Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice has been involved, and Delma alluded to, you know, organizations that benefit from that. But it really was, you know, identifying who the experts are in the neighborhoods where we're trying to make some sort of positive built environment change, and letting them lead the efforts, right? As city agencies, I think oftentimes we have sort of come in as like, we have already identified what the need is, and we're just trying to figure out how to implement it, and maybe not doing a genuine sort of engagement process. But I think what we know from the research and the evidence base as we've explored the ADGs is that it has impacts on people's perceptions of safety, of health, of wellness, of mental health and social ties if you do go forward with a community-led process. One thing I do want to sort of say when we're talking about equity, and we're talking about changes to the public realm that happen really quickly, and this echoes what Karen is saying, that there are sometimes unintended consequences, you know, to making improvements that we think are good for everybody. But if we don't understand the neighborhood that you're designing for, then, you know, it does become a hazard for maybe some of our older adults to walk down the street. If there's a lot more sort of street furniture, or there's these open restaurants, if you don't talk to people, or you don't understand who's living on those streets, you can't avoid those. And I just, you know, for us, as we develop the ADGs, we really sort of want to highlight those things throughout the document and really apply the equity and racial justice lens. Like, you know, what we've sort of come from the research of what we've seen is that oftentimes the research and the evidence that we're citing are not necessarily who participated in the studies that we're referencing, right? There are a lot of white folks who have been researched, and this is what we've pulled from those studies. And so we really want to be transparent about that, is that this is what we've heard from the research. These are the gaps in the research. And this is why, as you approach designing communities, that you really need to do a meaningful engagement process to understand where that happens.
Absolutely. Thank you, Josh. And that leads to my final question for Eric. Eric, we've talked about outdoor dining as one of the kind of most visible and dramatic aspects of new streetscape uses. But in so many ways, this is just the beginning of, you know, in terms of the potential to reimagine how our streets and sidewalks can be used. As you look toward this reimagining process that Josh has mentioned, are there initiatives, like, can you tell us a little bit about how you're beginning to explore this next frontier of opportunities for innovation in streetscape use and design?
Sure. So I think there's a lot of things that have been brought up in the discussion points from the other panelists. You know, I think a lot of things that Karen was mentioning, a lot of questions that are popping up in the chat, that the Open Restaurants program was that it was really focused on restaurants. And I think there's a real earnest and something that we from city planning side and urban design have been really trying to work with our friends in other agencies, with DOT, with DOE, with others, to think about how our streets and sidewalks, you know, from the curb line where cars take up space, can be utilized for other things. So, you know, how are we looking at school clusters and their relationship to NYCHA campuses, and what are the streets that connect to those places, and how can those be, you know, taken over for places for play or for safe movement for kids to get to and from school. You know, I think that there's you know, a lot of questions in the chat about, you know, how are we using these for other things than just restaurants. And so, you know, there's a temporary program now for that SBS has worked to put up along with DOT for open storefronts, so that businesses can operate in the street. I think it's important for you know, other institutions, libraries, along those lines, that should also have access. And so how do we as a city create a program that can be as wide casting as what OR, Open Restaurants, has shown us, but also let it be a little bit more flexible, so that if my block has a good organization and can get around it and can set up programming, then they should absolutely be able to, you know, kind of say what should take place on their block. So I think It's about taking what we've learned from being transparent, as I think Josh was alluding to too, is like, what tools are we creating? You know, we've got a really great map that showed us sidewalk widths throughout the whole city, and like, how can we share these things with folks in their neighborhoods so that they can kind of take advantage of the same things that we're utilizing to make decisions, and actually have them drive. So I think, and certainly thinking about all users on the street, as Karen mentioned, is something that's very important. There's no shortage of things. I know there's also how we deal with sanitation and trash, and you know, these are also things that happen on our sidewalks, which impede us from walking. And should that happen on the curb line? How can we bring in more planting and biophilic design to our streets? So, you know, these are all things that I think are ripe for discussion. And as we transition into a new administration, these are things that we really need to charge those that will lead us in the future to invest in public spaces.
Excellent. Such a complex topic once you start looking into the uses and potential of our streets and sidewalks. We're nearly out of time, but I do want to ask a few audience questions. Carrie, can you
Hi. Yeah, so no, I've been following the chat and the questions, and what's really great is that our panelists have been also watching in the chat, and also people pose questions and other audience members have been answering them. So we had, you know, how do we do public engagement during COVID? I mean, obviously we can't just go meet together in a big room, but I do think that I think Jenna shared a link to a Hester Street document. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about, if anyone of our panelists have any ideas for community engagement during these days of COVID. That's one.
Yeah.
Real quick on that one, I could just plug that there is NYC Engage. We can drop that into the chat too, but there's a platform where public meetings from a multitude of agencies and commissions can be viewed by the public. So that's something that's happened, which has been really great. Our City Planning Commission now is in this virtual space. So, you know, I think that also allows for folks to attend these sessions when they couldn't do so previously. So having that as a platform has been really huge, and one that I think other agencies will tap into.
Great, thank you. Yeah, please do share that in the chat, Eric. And we'll also collect all of the links and resources that were provided and share them along with the recording to all the attendees today.
This is Karen.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to weigh in on that it's really an issue, because in terms of how we do that engagement, because a lot of the people that we would like to be a part of this are not tech savvy in terms of being able to get on Zoom calls and that sort of stuff. But how are we creative in terms of, you know, weather permitting, outdoor events, but also has anyone looked at how we can use our great signage that has been created by our Link, New York City kiosk.
NYC
Link, if there's some way that can be interactive, that someone could come up to that and just voice their issue. This is what this street will look like. What do you think? Yes, no, you know, the kind of smiley face, non-smiley face, and particularly even seniors, because a lot of the engagement that I saw that's been a part of Department of Health and Mental Hygiene were a lot of things that happen at senior centers. We are really, I have not been a part of that network or to talk to the Department of Aging, but that was a place that a lot of this interaction and even talking about active design would happen there. But how do we look for different ways to engage seniors? And again, perhaps the nonprofits that we work with might have links to things like churches that already have some kind of network or other ways. But I think these are things that we have to look at, particularly as we look at the things that have been created, how we evaluate them and how they become permanent, or how we weigh the good, the bad for both sides, the greater area.
Absolutely. There were some just statements that I think are important to think about, which is we're either in the second wave or approaching the second wave, or you may say it's the third wave of the pandemic, and it's also getting colder out. And so how do we, we want to, as you mentioned, the public spaces are so important, yet we're going to find ourselves in a situation where, we need them, but it's too cold to go outside, or we also want to make sure that they're being designed for safety. But I think that, and then there was a question about how schools can use it, and I think that was answered in the chat. Someone, Adrian Smith, had asked about how creatives can become involved with some of the activities and initiatives that were discussed today. So if anyone has ideas for how people can volunteer to contribute to these projects, they could include that in the chat, or we can share it, or you can speak up now. I think our panelists can all unmute themselves, so chime in if you want to.
I just want to say real quick, we're working really closely with the Center for Active Design on the update to the Active Design Guidelines, and we're certainly looking for good project examples of the areas that we're talking about in the ADGs. So there'll be a digital blast at some point with a link for a call for projects that folks can enter projects and talk about the aspects of it that promote health. And so I can share that. Maybe Carrie, I can share a link with you at some point, and we can share it with everybody who's on this call, because I know we have a lot of expertise on here.
Sure.
Just because we would love to get as many ideas as possible.
Absolutely.
Okay, Carrie, I noticed a lot of the questions also talked about how we continue to push for more, taking away more parking for other uses. And I very much applaud that and see this as a way, again, to, if we get people more engaged in thinking about climate change and how that's an issue. But we do have to realize that a lot of our essential workers are using cars more because of maybe their fear of public transit, but also a lot of people who are essential workers actually have to drive to the locations where they do their work. So the other side of that, just being a devil's advocate kind of, is that the restaurants want people to come to their restaurants, who a lot of them from outside. So there is a push-pull there, but we have to be, again, be cognizant of that the automobile with, first of all, fewer spaces, but also some of the people who live in our city neighborhoods who are now getting, using their out of the city places. Also, or I've heard of 2 or 3 friends who are getting a car so they can get to those places. But again, there's a lot of things that we at least need to hear from all sides of the coin. But for me, getting rid of the cars and some of the ideas about that being places for sanitation and other activities of a community in the streetscape would be great, but we have to look at the other side of things.
Great, thank you. I think that's it, Jeff. Unless anyone else has something to say.
Yeah, are there any other closing comments from the other panelists?
And I do want to mention again, Zara Stasia, the artist who you can see is creating this really cool drawing while our panelists were just talking, and we will share this with everyone who attended today, and you'll see it online and social media very soon. And oh, there was one question about what software Sarah's using. I don't know if she's.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. I'm drawing on my iPad using an app called Procreate. It's very inexpensive. I think when I bought it was $9 forever. And it's a very accessible, easy to just write or draw app. It feels kind of like using a pen and paper. So if you're interested or you take notes this way, it's called Procreate.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
All right.
Okay, well, before we sign off, I just want to give a huge thank you to our panelists and participants for this incredibly rich dialogue. I want to thank Justin and the staff of the Design Commission for all their support in producing today's program. And finally, I invite you all to stay in touch as we continue this conversation over the coming months and work toward the Streetscape publication next year. So much more to come. And we look forward to sharing it with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jeff. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jeff. And thank you, Jenna, and all the PDC staff who organized this.
Yes, yes. Big shout out to the PDC team.